and I'm going to show you in a moment where you can find the past recordings if you don't know. Cool. So meeting has started, recording has started. Okay. So we don't have many people join up yet. All of you actually who have joined up, I think you've been following us for a while. But since we lost Pass, our website on SQL Pass, our actually only group site is the Meetup one. So if you haven't signed up there, go ahead and sign up to get notifications and all that good stuff. We're in the process of talking about Microsoft. Microsoft is building their own community site, Power BI group site, but it's kind of under development right now. So I'm not going to put a link of it because I just want to see what's going to happen. I mean, we've been bounced around for a few times, to dynamic communities, to other things, and eventually, just things didn't materialize as initially were presented to us. So for the time being, the only group that we have is the Meetup one. And then if you get some value from these meetings, obviously spread the words, spread the word to your coworkers. If you want to get more involved, always looking for quality speakers. And at some point when we get back to the office, sponsors and things like this. So the recordings are available on this website in here. So this is https bit.ly Atlanta BI Rex, where you can actually get all the recordings since we started doing the virtual thing. And the last thing on this slide, on the subject of jobs, typically this is where I'm asking if you have any job openings, or if you're looking for Microsoft BI talent to, let us know. Does anybody have any? Is anybody looking for talent, for BI talent? Any job openings?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Okay, there we go. Keep on going then. So on the event side of things, I haven't come across anything interesting, any event of interest. I hope I did not miss anything substantial, but nothing actually, I guess probably because of vacation and all of this, no events worth mentioning. And if somebody, yep.
Yeah, Teo, the call for speakers for Atlanta Code Camp is open. I believe it's atlantacodecamp.org. Let me double check that. But they cover quite a bit. They pretty much cover the whole stack, Microsoft and open source. So let me just double check the website.
Is it Atlanta?
It's atlantacodecamp.com. But they do SQL and BI from a variety of perspectives. So
I see.
Yeah.
So this is going to be July?
No, October 9th.
Okay.
The event is October 9th. That's the call for speakers.
Okay, gotcha. Atlanta Code Camp, developer-oriented event, but if you, maybe you can put it in your calendars. They're calling for speakers. If you want to present on some kind of a development technology. And Power BI, there's a lot of developer-oriented stuff, Power BI embedded, REST APIs, and things like this. So go ahead and actually register. Any other events that anybody can think of, come across? Anything else?
Isn't Ignite or one of the, isn't there a Microsoft event coming up?
So Ignite is for, where was the Ignite?
I thought I saw an email on it. That's
I thought that
did that happen already? Did that happen already? Did I miss it?
I think it did, if I'm not wrong. Inspire is coming soon, but that one is actually for partners.
Okay.
If you want to go there, we'll kind of meet with Microsoft as a partner. Then I think Ignite actually passed already.
I think you're right. Okay, it was Inspire though that I just got the email.
Inspire, that's right. What about SQL Saturday? Has anybody heard of it?
The new Azure group, we're calling it the Azure Data Group, I believe. the old past SQL group. Redgate is talking about restarting something like SQL Saturday because they bought quite a few of the past assets and intellectual property, but I haven't heard anything definitive yet.
Yeah, I checked a few days ago. I don't see, I guess, any SQL Saturday events. I'm not sure if this is I guess that's the new website because it looks a little bit different than the previous one. There are some interesting stuff going on here. Actually, there are Saturdays, but nothing, I guess, nothing in the state, I guess. Well, all right, hopefully they're going to start that again. All right, so moving to some of the most important news around Power BI and Microsoft BI that caught my attention since the last time we met, which was June, I believe June 7th or something like that. So not many earth-shattering announcements in there. So we have now a support, which actually it's so funny. You know, one of my clients actually asked me, literally like a week ago, can we connect to a data flow in direct query mode? So there's a lot of stuff going on here. If you're not that familiar with Power BI, I'm not sure if you know what data flow is, but think about data flow as a ETL for the data analyst. So let's say there are some staging that you need to do, and along the way you want to do some transformations. Maybe from your CRM system, from Salesforce, you want to stage the data before you access it, probably to improve performance or something else. Or you just want to have like a trusted data set that you want to make available for everyone to use. So then this data flow feature may come handy just to refresh your memory. I kind of quickly, to show you a quick demo. So if I go to this folder in here, by the way, the data flow is also, it doesn't require Power BI Premium. It's also a Power BI Pro feature. There are some features that require premium, but for the most part, data flows are just regular Power BI feature. So here what I did, I set up a data flow. When I went to that workspace, I could actually create a data flow. So this data flow, think of it as a Power Query in the cloud. Basically, you are familiar on the desktop with the technology called Power Query, which allows to do transformations before the data lands in Power BI desktop. The same thing we can do on the cloud. So we kind of decouple this, we put it on the in the cloud, and then what this data flow does is actually very simple. It gets the data back to the example that I gave you from my CRM system. It could be a Salesforce. Along the way, I can do some transformations. As you can see, this interface here should look very familiar to you because it's very similar to Power Query. So I can do things like column splitting, deduping data, selecting random set of rows, all of this, most of these transformations that we have in Power Query. And then we can go and actually save that data flow and schedule it. You know, periodically, maybe every day, go ahead, get the data, put it. Where does it save the data? It saves the data into a data lake that Microsoft gives you for free, with the caveat that you cannot access the data in that data lake that Microsoft provides. The only thing for you to get access to that data is to use the data flow connector in Power BI Desktop. But if you have your own data lake, you can bring it in, you can replace with your own data lake, and then you will be able to access actually the raw data in that data lake. So speaking of consumption, once we have that data flow, then one way for us to consume it will be to go to get data, and data flows are just one of the, actually, I'm sorry, I'm not in the desktop. So I'm going back to the desktop, and when I go to Power BI Desktop, we have something called Power BI Data Flow. So this is the connector. If I don't bring my data lake, The only way to get output of the data flow, basically to consume it, is to use this Power BI data flows connector. And this is all great. It's going to go to your tenant. It's going to find all the data flows that you have permissions to. It's going to give you a nice preview. And then just like usual, you can go ahead and check the data flow and load it. So this is how it's been working all along. You can, if you use that data flow connector, you can, the only option for you was to import the data, basically. But there are could be some interesting scenarios where connecting live to that data flow could be useful. So a while back, I don't know how if you remember this, but reporting service actually supported an interesting feature where if you have a SSIS package that does some transformations, you can actually consume the output of that SSIS package in SSRS report. So the same thing here, if you don't want to import the data, maybe there is some real-time transformation that needs to happen, there is an option now to consume this in direct query mode. But you don't see it here as an option. The only option that we see here is load. And that's because this feature requires a certain settings that needs to be enabled. If you are on Power BI Premium Generation 2, the only thing that you need to do is to go to the capacity settings. Your administrator needs to go there and is to turn on a special feature that is called Enhanced Data Flows Compute Engine. So this has to be actually on before we have the option to connect live to the data flow output. So I'm not going to show this. I'm going to show you a demo, but if that sounds interesting, we have it in there. The next thing is more on the developer side of things. Many of you know that Power BI actually is kind of automated. Many aspects of Power BI can be automated. Things like uploading data sets, exporting reports, enumerating reports or workspaces. If you want to kind of programmatically access the content in Power BI. So this set of REST APIs now actually was enhanced with another set of APIs called scanner APIs. So this scanner APIs gives you more accessibility to the metadata. So for example, imagine you want to automate the process of maybe deploying data sets, but you want kind of be able to scan programmatically to go through each data set and figure out what metadata this data set has, what kind of measures it has. This also could be useful for things like cataloging, right? So for example, you want to actually write a program. Imagine this, you're a developer, your boss comes to you and says, Theo, I want you to go through all the data sets and tell me where this column is being used. Kind of data lineage, right? Where this particular column is being used. Maybe there is a kind of a privacy thing going on there. You just want to know where this company is, which data set actually used this column. So by using this scanner API, actually can do that. You can enumerate the metadata. Of course, you can use commercial product. So maybe you heard that Microsoft has a technology called Azure Purview, which is designed exactly to do that, to catalog your data set so you can see the lineage all the way from the source of the data all the way to the Power BI reports. But if for some reason you want to do that programmatically, now actually we have the option to do this. And the final thing that I want to talk about, a feature, and I would say technology that is near and dear to my heart, reporting services, SSRS. So now they're called paginated reports. And maybe you know that if you have used SSRS reports in the past, now you can kind of deploy them to Power BI. And the reason this feature is near and dear to my heart is because when I got serious on my Microsoft BI many years ago, that was the technology that I started with, one of the technologies actually. That's how I got my MVP. SSRS reports still are the most flexible report type we have in the Microsoft ecosystem. It's a very versatile. Almost every property of, let's say, in the SSRS report, in the paginated report, you can customize it. You can write expressions behind it. Unfortunately, not many of these customization features actually made it to Power BI. So when SSRS started, you can customize almost every aspect of it, but you gotta write code, so you can extend it with .NET assemblies. You can write data extensions, delivery extensions. Very versatile. From the very beginning, was a very flexible architecture. Anything that requires custom code, you don't have it in Power BI. So all of this extensibility, unfortunately, it's not in Power BI. However, you can still use write Visual Basic expressions to, programmatically at runtime control almost every property in reporting services. So if you have invested in SSRS, or if you have found cases in Power BI that are better met by creating a paginated report, and that paginated report is deployed to Power BI. Now, price alert here, this feature requires Power BI Premium because only Power BI Premium supports deploying paginated reports. So if you have Power BI Premium, either Premium per user or Power BI Premium plan, and you have deployed paginated reports, now what Microsoft allows you to do is to actually embed them on your Power BI report, just like any other visual. So why would you want to do that? Well, imagine you have a dashboard. You want to create a dashboard looking report. And most of the visuals are Power BI visuals, but there is one visual in there that requires features that maybe Power BI doesn't support. So features like more customizations, just something that Power BI doesn't support yet. So what you can do now, you can actually put that report on a page. Not only you can put it, but you can parameterize it. So when the user changes a filter, and that filter is passed as a parameter to the paginated report, when the user changes the slicer or the filter, the paginated report gets updated. So I want to show you a quick demo of this. I unfortunately didn't have much time to create a nice looking paginated report. But let's see how that feature works. I'm in Power BI Desktop, and you just make sure that you have, the latest version of Power BI Desktop, which is June, right? The June release is the latest one. So if you have the June release, what do we see here? When we take a look at the visualizations, we see a new icon. And when we hover on top of it, it says Paginate Report Preview. Oh, by the way, because this is a preview feature, you guys know what you have to do to get this to light up, right? You have to make sure that you go to the preview features and you check this Paginate Report visual, because if you don't check it, you won't get it, right? This is a preview feature right here. So you enable it, it's going to ask you to restart Power BI Desktop, you do that, and then you're going to get that little icon in here. So let's go and add it to our report. First thing it asks me to do, I have to specify what paginated report I want to show in this visual. So I'm going to click it in there, it's going to scan all the tenants, and it's going to give me it's going to scan the entire tenant, all the workspaces I have access to, and it's going to say, okay, this is the paginated reports I found. Again, when I say paginated, think about SSRS, right? So here what I have, let's go ahead and check this first one, see what's going to happen in there. Now, if the report has parameters, the next step will be to set the parameters. And the way we set the parameter, the way we pass parameters, so for example, let's say this report has a parameter called server. If I want to pass something to this parameter at runtime, I have to add a corresponding field through this area in here of the visual that is called parameters. This is how I can parameterize, I can pass parameters to a paginated report that is already parameterized. In my case, I don't have any field in here that is gonna, by the way, this report, I think I wrote it a long time ago to show how we can change connection strings in SSRS report on the fly. So imagine you are, let's say, a ISV, and depending on the user, you wanna switch the database to this database, to that database, at runtime. So I think this is what I did in here as a demo, but this is not important. And I don't have a field from my Power BI dataset that can drive this parameter. But luckily, this parameter has a default value. So I'm just going to say, use the default value of the parameter, and I'm going to click See Report, right? I'm going to See Report, and now Power BI Desktop is going to actually render this paginated report. And that paginated report is nothing to brag about. It's a very dull looking report in here, but this is SSRS reports, SSRS report. So what I can do here, typically SSRS reports have things like parameters. Also, they can be exported to, and that's another good feature about SSRS. You can export it to PDF, Excel, Word document. We have lots of export options. But here, by default, we don't get to see them. Why? Because we have to go to the visual properties, and here we have a property called toolbar. So if I check that one, magically, I'm seeing here a toolbar that allows me to export the report and also navigate. If the report has multiple pages, I can go actually navigate to the next page of the report. Another feature why you might want to consider SSRS reports, because unlike Power BI visuals, SSRS reports expand. So if I have lots of data, and if I want user to be able to export it, if I want the user to be able actually to print it, Power BI, you cannot do that. Once you have a visual, once you size it, when you print it, that's what you get, right? Whereas in SSRS, it's going to paginate the report to accommodate the data set that your visuals have. So that would be another example to consider SSRS reports if that's a requirement. So what else we got here? Okay, so we've got this, so there is, I think, one little bug where when you click on the report visual, it doesn't select it. So you have to click actually on the border to select it back. So when we go here, we enable the toolbar. We can also enable parameters. And when I enable parameters, now if this report has parameters, actually, I'll be able to see them here. Just like when you render this paginated report online, I can set parameters, I can export, and all that good thing. But another feature that is really cool here is something called auto apply filters. Now that feature, if the report accepts parameters, and if I drag a field from my dataset, and if I bind it to a parameter, so actually it gets passed to SSRS, and if the user has a filter or slicer to change that parameter value, if this option is enabled, when they make the change, Power BI is going to refresh this paginated report based on the parameter that the user has selected. So now you can have a dashboard, user can have a slicer, and that slicer can slice both Power BI visuals and the paginated report visual at the same time. And also, cross-filtering also works. So if I had a dashboard and I click a data point in one visual and the report against is parameterized on that field, then that context is going to flow into the paginate report viewer, and the report is going to get refreshed. So what do you guys think? Is this something that potentially could be useful for you?
So Teo, you have to develop the report in SSRS then?
You have to develop it. So SSRS reports, as you guys probably know, they're written in schema called RDL, which is kind of an XML-based schema. So you have different options to create this report, but the one that Microsoft, actually, I don't think I have it installed since I recently have bought a new laptop, but there is a tool called paginated, what was it called?
Just Report Builder? The old Report Builder?
Well, and that's what I wanted to show you, but now there are two flavors of it. So the old report builder that you know of, you can still use it. It's still going to generate RDL definition of the report, but it's going to also allow you to do features that Power BI doesn't support. So what Microsoft did, they kind of cloned that report builder, and I think now it's called Paginate or Power BI report builder. So make sure you kind of install that one, because that one is going to kind of box you to features that Power BI, paginate report features that Power BI supports. And also is going to allow you to connect to Power BI datasets. So there are some Power BI specific features. So you're going to use that specific version of the report builder. You're going to build your report and you're going to deploy to a premium workspace.
Then I have a question about the scanner API. I don't know how much you know about that. Does that give you all of the characterization, that you get in Power BI if you're turn on all the features in Power Query to see what the distribution of the column is and that kind of stuff?
It's a very good question. I haven't had a chance to play with this, to be honest with you. So I'm not sure at what point do we get Power Query. To be honest, I doubt it. But I see here they have references to mashup expression. So please take a look at the documentation. I just didn't have a chance to look exactly what it does. Like this detail lineage. For instance, since you're able to retrieve the mashup query associated with the dataset table, you can see which columns in which datasets. Okay, but this is more for columns. I don't think you're going to get probably the profiling thing that you're talking about, Eric.
Okay.
But please take a look and see, what you're going to get. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that was the end of the road for me. So now, at the very beginning, those of you guys who actually kind of join us later, I kind of apologize because kind of lack of planning on my side for July 4th. Obviously, a lot of people are still on vacation. So right now we have, how many people? We have 13 people total. So to be fair to our presenter, presenters are probably the most important thing, obviously the most important thing for our group to continue to exist. I want to ask Ray, how does he feel about the audience? And if he's okay, we're going to continue. If not, maybe we can reschedule it for a better day. What do you think, Ray? Would you like to go and record that for people to watch after that? Or are you happy with or would you like to postpone this presentation?
We can go ahead and continue with it today, and just like you said, record and everything. And then for the people participating, just feel free at the stopping points that I give throughout their presentation, go ahead and just ask questions, and we'll hang out and make it very natural and fun.
And just to compensate you a little bit about this, because I really feel bad about this, is that after this meeting, I'm going to remind people, we had like 40 people sign up, but obviously only 1/3 of them actually could make it. I'm going to remind them that the recording is going to be available in there, and so they can watch it. Our membership is almost 2,000 people. So hopefully that will give you more exposure. And again, it was just a little bit of bad planning on my side. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead, Ray. The floor is yours. Thank you so much again for doing this for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get everything set up and I will share my screen. There we go. Okay. Here. Turn on my camera. Perfect. And this one. All right. Everybody can hear me okay and see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So this is one of my more recent presentations that I've thrown together. It's going to be a lot of conversations around really interesting and unique ways to use both bookmarks and buttons, and add a little bit of aesthetic flair to them. Also, just some really creative ways to use both in terms of what bookmarks can capture and the capture states, or better said, and even some of the ways that you can utilize buttons in very unique ways as visuals in Power BI. So just a little background about myself for those less familiar. I've been in the BI space, business intelligence space, for maybe, I'm losing track now, like not quite a decade, but I think like 9 years now. And I started back in Excel with Power Pivot, worked my way through Power View, back when it was, kind of the grandfather of Power BI, and all the way up through what we have today when it comes to the BI capabilities within Microsoft. Even dabbled a little bit in Report Builder and SSRS back in the day, but definitely like that Power BI is a lot less code when it comes to the user friendliness of it in those regards. But my specialty has really been with like aesthetic and design. Just like most of the other MVPs in my space, I can do data modeling and DAX and Power Query and basically everything to build out the model to display it. But I found that there were less people that were kind of specializing in the design and in aesthetics and the storytelling aspect, kind of from the front end of the report design. So ended up just finding it was a natural kind of talent of mine that people just were relying on me on. So just kind of leaned my whole business into that. I even have a YouTube channel that I maintain videos about once or twice a week on tips and tricks. This year I've been bringing a lot of guests on. COVID kept housing everybody up in a bubble. So I decided to start doing weekly streams on Fridays where I kind of a bit like a user group in some ways, where I bring on a guest, often like people from Microsoft or other MVPs like myself, and we either have a conversation for about an hour and just talk about a subject with people commenting in the chat. Sometimes we also just, I'll have somebody demo something on how to do, last week was usage metrics in Azure and how to actually pull that into Power BI reports. But lots of cool community activities and very many, like 100+ tutorials, videos that just talk about everything related to Power BI. And overall, I think this is my 71st presentation that I've done, either at conferences, pre-cons, meetups. So I really enjoy just hanging out with the community in general. But enough about me. I want to talk a little bit about what we will also be discussing today. So this presentation, like a lot of the ones that I do, I like to build it very modularly, kind of give you little snack-sized bits of information about a lot of different topics. So what you'll see in here is something that can be scaled from like 45 minutes up to an hour and a half to 2 hours. We'll get through most of the demonstrations, but probably not quite all of them in just given in an hour, I'd say 50-minute time frame from now. But any additional stuff as well, I will have some resources and links to link you to my YouTube channel for additional content consumption if you choose. But this will be primarily demo driven. So I'll actually now exit out of my PowerPoint and go ahead and start with some of the fun demos. Okay. So this first demonstration is going to be a bit of a grab bag, and making sure my Zoom it still works. There we go. All right, my Zoom is working. So we have in front of us, and with many of these demos, by the way, I often get inspired for these by client scenarios where a client gives me a unique thing to build that I probably wouldn't have thought of myself, but they would like me to figure out using basically the out-of-box solutions that is in Power BI for this. And this was a client scenario where they wanted a button to basically toggle perspectives of hierarchy levels for quarter. And if I click around in here, month and day. They wanted a single click where normally, with anything like a bookmark, it's kind of a macro action recorder. Instead of having to go to per visual and navigate up every single hierarchy one at a time, which is a lot of clicks and effort, they just want to be able to, click once, boom, have it immediately take them to whatever level that is. And that was something that I ended up utilizing bookmarks for. One, because I would say it's a capture state people don't think about as often. Most people, when they think about bookmarks, from my interactions with clients and consumers, is it often just is a filter macro. So like Steve or Mary has a configuration of a certain number of slices and filters that gives them their data, and they want to just click a button to have it take it to finance perspective or marketing or anything like that. But it also captures a lot of elements built into almost everything onto the page, including hierarchy levels. You could also see at the top that the buttons themselves represent what bookmark has been activated. It doesn't just trigger it in the visuals, but it indicates in the buttons themselves, oh, right now, quarter's been selected. And same thing, you click month. It makes the buttons themselves are an indicator of what bookmark has been activated. So you don't have to have a separate title card that says current active bookmark or anything. You can use the buttons to represent that, kind of like on a web page or anything else where you have CSS options activated to give an effect of click and all these other things where you have a default, an on hover, on press. If you do that to the activated button, nothing's happening. So it seems to be activated at this perspective. So I'll kind of walk you through both of those, talk a bit about buttons, ways you configure them, and also the capture state for this. I'm going to come over here to the formatter, and I'm also going to start by opening under my view ribbon. I'm going to open the selection pane and the bookmarks pane. So we have a few things open over here. So you might notice that I have a group up here called date buttons. Groups, by the way, are super handy in Power BI. I wish they would have added them much sooner than only about a year and a half ago, but it allows you to have multiple objects on the page that can all be moved together as a group. Operates very similar to like a PowerPoint way where you can use your mouse to highlight objects and then group or ungroup them as necessary. But it also organizes your elements in the visuals pane. Pro tip that I would recommend is if you're building Power BI reports, it's really good to give everything a friendly name. Every time I add a button to the page, the only name it has in the selection pane is button. And if I add 5 of them, they're all just going to be called button over and over again. It's very generic. And the only way then to kind of see which is which, you have to click on it. Then you look on the page, which one is it highlighting? So, take extra time. And the phrase that I like is be kind to your future self. Name your objects in there just so it adds a breadcrumb trail and a bit of notes for yourself. And grouping, again, it organizes stuff that are related to each other. But the thing that I want to call out is the fact that I actually have 6 items, but only 3 buttons that are over here, because each set of buttons has 2 versions of the button that are on the page right here. First version, let me go ahead and I'll use day as the example. This one is visible right now. That is a button that has been formatted to appear like it has not been selected yet, and it can be activated. Now, alternatively, if I hide that, I have another version of that button that looks depressed. So today, this is the fastest route to creating this that I've come up with. I would like someday for buttons to have some kind of an indicator on there. And to give some context, I'll show you the settings. Every button has an action that can be assigned to it, whether or not it's a bookmark or a few other things. I really wish there was a way to determine if this bookmark is currently active or not. Have the button recognize that and then have some additional formatting setting. There's no way for the button to know, is the bookmark that's assigned to me, is it turned on or off? There's no context for that today. So the only way to really get it to stay permanently pressed, in this case with that darker color, is I have a second version of it hit on the page. So when that bookmark activates, and I will again give you an example here, watch the icons over here. For the hidden and unhidden, they'll change when I will control and activate this. That one became unhidden, this one became hidden. So to the user, it just looks like you clicked it. But I basically just have 2 versions of the button laid on top of each other, and then one hides and one shows to create the effect of clicking it down. So that is the button configurations. And the way I do that is each button has 3 primary states: the default, hover, and press. So with the activated or depressed button, it's going to be, in this case, the fill, same color for each one. I use color to kind of indicate pressing or clicking ability in there, where the other ones have a third state where it's lighter, darker, even darker. So it gives that 3-stage effect of clicking it. And almost any one of these states, as we'll see in other demos, there's many ways to actually configure the states to do a lot of interesting things with the button. That's how I create the 2 different states and activation states there. And the last thing that I'll mention, I'm going to copy one of these out. Here we go. Your best friend when it comes to design and also pixel perfect alignment, snap to grid. Before this was added, you used to have to come to the general. You'd have to pixel by pixel do the positions, do the width, and basically you'd have to copy and paste the settings between 2 items to make sure that they're directly on top of each other. Or you simply have snap to grid turned on. As long as you have, there's object 1. Let's say I have another one. There's object 2. Every snap is 8 pixels. Put it on top of each other. The 2 objects are now completely perfectly pixel aligned. There's no extra work. You don't even have to go to the general. It will snap it to the exact same spot and it will size it. And this, by the way, these little gaps here, this is just one snap. And that's usually the spacing that I give between everything. So it drastically reduces the effort and time to align things in your report, because I just one snap distance between everything, and then I size within a snap. Rarely I need to adjust something a bit more granularly, and then I'll just simply turn it off. Maybe use my keyboard to like move an object over a couple pixels and then turn it back on. But until I move it again, it adheres, to the location that I put it at. But it really does drastically reduce development time, and helps when you need to stack objects on top of each other that will show and hide. So that way they don't shift at all, when you toggle the two of them, and cause any abnormalities in the overall design. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of these. There you go. So I'm going to create a bookmark to finish this one off and show you the process of setting this up. So I want to essentially create the state to capture at the month level. So that means I'm going to need to configure everything in my selection pane to be at that. So to start with, I'm going to move all 4 of these visuals up to the month level. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to configure the buttons to be in the state where this one's inactive, quarter's fine as is, but I basically want to change the setting to have the month button be the active one. So over here, unhide that, hide that. There you go. Month is now the right one showing, and day, just flip the 2 of them. Hide that, unhide that. So now every object on my page that I choose to capture is configured correctly. And the nice thing with bookmarks is now I don't have to come in and do this. One more time. Do that. I don't have to select them all individually. If I just select the group up here, everything inside of it is considered part of that group. So that is included in my capture state. And you'll see why I'm selecting certain objects. And separately in here, let me select that one more time. There we go. And I'm holding control, and I only care about the 4 visuals. I don't care about any other thing in this little group. I have some color background and a shadow that I put into there, but I just care about these 4 visuals. So I've selected everything in here, everything in here. So I'm going to do a bookmark, and I'm going to create month test. And we will discuss why I select those specific ones. Here we go. So there's an option in any bookmark to do selected visuals. So what this means is that these exact objects and these, actually better said just, there you go, just those ones. Those are what is part of the selected visuals. Anything that I actively selected and highlighted in my selection pane is part of that. So now when I select this and I change the setting to selected visuals, what that means is that it's only going to update the items I had selected at the time. So if I had other visuals on the page, if I had a slicer in my title section, any of those things are ignored, and it doesn't reset or update them at all. This is a great way to ensure that your bookmark doesn't accidentally toggle something. If you had a slicer on this page that was selected to year equals 2014, that's part of the capture selection, and it might reset that slicer back to year equals 2014 because you're asking the bookmark to return it, to return the page to whatever configuration state you had. It definitely provides a nice little security blanket and reduces the chance of accidental resetting of other objects on the page. And then we want to make sure that we have the right things in here configured. Data does need to be selected. Typically, it's the, as you can see, filter, drill, and sort states that are in there. However, something that is also part of the data state is what level your hierarchy is in. It doesn't matter if you actually drilled in or not. Simply the navigation level of the visual or table is something that's captured as part of data. So that's going to be kept there. The display needs to be checked because that is the capture states for all of these here, and whether or not they're visible or not. And the current page is something we can actually uncheck, because the goal of this bookmark isn't to go to different pages. All it is simply doing the other 2 things that I just mentioned. So I'm going to uncheck that. And now it is very clearly telling me, if I come back to the future date, it cares about data and display. The bookmark does not care about current page, and I'm only doing the selected visuals. I will say that unfortunately, still even today, there's no way to like click a properties button and show for this bookmark what elements were selected at the time, what filters were. There's no way to see the metadata. The best way to see it is honestly, just write a note for it. OneNote document, wherever you keep it, put it in GitHub somewhere where you can have documentation. If you create a bookmark that explains what you did at the time, if you ever need to come back and maybe update it so you don't miss a piece. I would love it if it automatically showed you that in here, but that's not something today that's available. So all these little things help to ensure that you can come back to your work and understand what was happening. Now let's quickly test this. I'm going to go to the quarter level, and if I just click the bookmark to test its effect, It navigates to the month level. It shows and hides the correct buttons, and it navigates to that level in the hierarchy down here for those selected visuals. So you've got kind of a walkthrough of both a way to configure buttons to create active and inactive states, and you also saw a unique way to utilize the capture state of data to also change the hierarchy level of a visual. End goal being, most of the time with bookmarks, is you're trying to create a feature or an action that just requires less clicks for the user rather than having them manually do something over and over again in a very repetitive process. I'll pause here for a moment and ask her if there's any questions related to this. And I'll also make sure that I can have my chat up on the other screen. There we go. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions, and otherwise I'll start getting the next one ready.
I don't see any question except the exclamation. It looks like you have a big fan that she's so happy to attend your presentation. Any questions, guys? Anything so far about bookmarks and how they work to toggle the visibility?
And I think people can come off mute, right? I don't think that's disabled as the admin level, or is it?
No, everybody can unmute and ask questions in real time. So yeah, please feel free to either put it in the chat window or unmute yourself. Any
every
questions?
Once in a while,
yeah, go
every
ahead.
once in a while, I give a presentation where it's the person sets the meeting as a webinar, and that actually like permanently mutes participants, and it's always a little bit harder to ask a long question, on chat. So I prefer people just to pop up mute if they ever want one. But yeah, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to close this down and I'm going to open my next one. All right. Continuing the journey on capture states, and again, I think this is another great example of a situation that we have of a client that I had who wanted a really specific feature. And this comes from the issue that they had where they like the focus mode button, but they don't really like that it's conditionally show and hide. This was a client whose company was just starting to use Power BI, wasn't very familiar with the features yet, and they really felt that like people aren't going to know about that as much because you have to hover over it to see it, and then you can click it to focus the visual. So their request was like, well, is there any way for you to turn the header on? And it's one of those that it's an idea right now on Power BI.ideas, but there is currently today no way to come down to the visual header, and there's no toggle to say always show or stick it in any or pin it somehow. I would love that to be a feature where you could just have it on at all times. Not a feature available today. So the way I kind of thought about it for a bit and eventually decided on it is I went online. I found I think I just Googled like an expand icon, and I looked for one that's royalty free. It's very important for, even though it's probably like a 0.00, essentially zero chance that you might actually get sued over a copyright issue of an image in a small company report. It's still best practice to make sure you're not using anything that is typically sold behind a paywall at Imager or anything else. So I just found a free icon that is just an expand symbol, and I created a bookmark to attach to it that, when published, does the focus mode for customers, creating essentially an always on focus mode for their request. With the tools that I had available. Sometimes you have to think a little bit out of the box to get that to work. I will say the caveat in the location that I placed it is that I have the visual header turned off. The only icon they cared about for this visual was the focus mode. They didn't want the filter icon. They didn't want the additional options. It was mostly a static visual that they just wanted to expand out for the production report that they had in here. So in that case, one of the things that's important is that I went down and I made sure that visual header is turned off. So when you hover over it in the service, once it's published, there is no issues for that. And so I'll go ahead and just kind of show you the button itself. That simply was, and as I mentioned, an image that was added using the, zoom out a little bit. There we go. You can come up and you can just insert an image into here. And the great thing about that is, just like bookmarks, there is an option under actions to assign it. Like any other button, you can choose what you would want to assign as an action here. And I created a bookmark specifically in here. So I'm going to actually show you the bookmark process and what state that is part of in the demo for this. It's a pretty quick and straightforward one, but it gets you to think a bit out of the box on how to use images and a few other things to kind of get some of these effects. So the capture state that I want is going to be for this visual, the one that we have in front of us. So I will turn on both my bookmarks and my selection pane. There we go. And under visuals, There you go. That's the only thing that I care about because I want to capture the focus mode for revenue. So I'm going to select it, I'm going to focus mode, expand it out. That's the only setup that I need. And then I will click add, call this focus demo. All right. Now let's set this up. Number one, selected visuals. And the last thing that I'll mention about that is there might be occasionally a time when you have all visuals selected, but the vast majority of your bookmarks probably have a subset of items on the page. So this really should be considered the default and the standard, setting up your bookmark this way. I cannot stress that enough because it does save headaches and issues and accidental resets for other visuals. That's selected. I don't need data because what I just did, the focus mode is not part of data. The focus mode is part of display. Display captures the display state for the visual. That includes its visibility, if it's hidden or not. That also captures the focus mode. One other thing that it does capture as well, just to mention, is spotlight. So if you have that configured, where it, I zoom out so you can see it, that's kind of where it pops the visual out onto the page. It grays everything else out. Normally what this is useful for is when you're doing a presentation or something and you kind of want like this to be the call out visual that people are looking at. It's a nice feature to do that. But those are two additional parts of display that aren't necessarily as obvious for that capture state. So I'll go back to focus mode. Here we go. So we have selected visuals enabled, data turned off, current page is also turned off. And the only thing left is just display and selected visuals. So now, where do I want to put it? I'm just going to stick this over here in the corner. This visual here, I am going to turn off the header because again, I don't want that to show. I just want the focus mode. If you wanted both, you still wanted the header and this to be somewhere else, I would recommend, you put that, let's assume maybe you wanted it down here or something. You could place it there and then the configuration, just to give you an example, I would configure this visual to still have the header on, but then so they don't have two options for it, I'll just make sure to come down and turn the focus mode off there. So that way they still have all other controls up here, but then wherever else you decided to place the button to expand it, that is now the only place to expand this visual for that, if you chose to configure it that way. But for our sake, I'm going to keep it in the corner and the visual header is going to stay off. And then all you have to do, go to the action and focus demo. There we go. I'm holding control, by the way, in desktop. If you are less familiar with bookmarks, in desktop, you have to hold control to activate it because they want to make sure when you're developing, you don't accidentally just click something and activate the bookmark and probably screw up a bunch of things that you were developing. So that is only a desktop restriction where the control has to be held first before activating. Otherwise, in the service, all you have to do is click it. And then the focus mode does the needed effect to give you that pop-up. But with this, it kind of shows you one, that bookmarks can be assigned to images that you can import, and two, a kind of a unique capture state, which is focusing. And honestly, before this, I kind of had known that was part of it, but I had never actually, this was the first time a couple years ago that I've ever built a bookmark that included focus mode, just because it was never really a common scenario to need to capture and to essentially navigate to via any other bookmark type. So this was I always like it when I can finally make something new in a report. Any questions on this one?
Questions? Anybody?
Let's spin up for a sec. Otherwise, I will give it a couple of seconds and then go to the next cool demo. All right, close you. Don't save. There you go. All right. Third demo, third client scenario. There's a couple in here every once in a while that I do myself just for fun, but it's like 30% of the videos that I do and cool tricks that come out of development, which is one of the reasons that as much as I love training, I do like development projects because I continuously learn and add like new fun tricks to my tool belt in a sense. Client saw, I think it was a website or something, the little radio toggle, and they wanted to create something like this. Little radio slider back and forth to do something. The effect is not as important. I'm toggling between two visuals. This could activate a series of actions, whatever you would like it to, but the thing that I want to call out on here is I did this with a native button in Power BI. This isn't an image. I didn't do anything fancy in Photoshop or anything to get this. I formatted the standard button just using the default settings in there, or the native settings, to create kind of something that goes back and forth. So the actual buttons in here that I had there, 2 different versions of the button. And just like in the first demo where I showed how to hide, show and hide native buttons that had like an active and inactive state, same thing here. It's a binary radio toggle right and left, and it just kind of slides back and forth. So with the effect of this, I want to go ahead and copy this out. Move you over here, and let's talk about the button settings that are in this. So many different things that you can configure inside of buttons. So the button text, actually I'll start with the button text. So just work my way top down. Notice that I have a little symbol in here and a bunch of different states that are over here on right, center, and left. So that's how I'm getting 3 different actions. My default state is on the right, and hover is in the middle. There's that one, and my press is over on the right. So it creates the effect of, physically moving a button back and forth with your mouse with the 3 different states that are in there. This, by the way, I need to zoom out to show this appropriately. This is an emoji symbol, essentially. If you actually in Windows do Windows key and semicolon, you get a pop-up of all the emojis available to use in Windows, which is really nice. And the better part, it gets a little weird when I have this pop-up and I use zoom it, but notice that I'm typing in circle. Now I am given every symbol in the emoji library that is related to circle, and the one that I want to call out is the white circle. That it just works very well as a slider that goes into here. I could have put a blue one or other colors if I wanted to, but I liked the black outline and everything onto that, so that's what I chose to use as my dot to be the little slider thing that you virtually finger back and forth. Now, one thing I want to mention as a caveat with the emoji library is that the symbol exists in all the libraries. So Windows, Linux, Android, iOS, going down the line of whatever other mobile OS might have it, they all have shared libraries to the sense that all of them have a version of the white circle. There's an emoji called white circle in all of them, but that circle can look different on an Apple machine. It can look different on an Android machine ever so slightly. Like Apple might have that circle, but with a little bit of a shadow gradient or something on it to give it a 3D effect. So depending on how strict the marketing is on like look and aesthetics, and depending on the device your consumers are looking at this with, it would be beneficial to figure that out to make sure that if this is something that really has to look a certain way, you don't want it to like render slightly differently on other machines, especially with like a lot of the ones with like the smileys and other stuff. They can look different enough that somebody might not like how it looks on one OS versus another. So just do a check to see how the users are consuming it, just as a small caveat when it comes to these, because they are rendered from a separate icon library per OS in that regard, versus like ASD in Times New Roman is always going to be that that font. All right, so that's the button itself that I got. A couple of other ones to mention here. The same thing with the colors. In the fill, it's just I basically selected one color for the right, a neutral color of gray for the middle, and for the left. But the fill is not the important part. The thing that gives it a radio button look is that in the outline options, you actually have something called edges. If I turn this off, it goes back to like a square button, but giving it a certain number of edges in here, it always annoys me when it does this. There we go, 20. It gives it a nice rounded effect, and it starts to look again like a toggle button. So all these are just settings that I did directly in here, rather than having to like make a custom image that can be uploaded into a button itself. The one thing that I've noticed a little bit irritating is if I put on rounded edges, if I turn off my outline, they stay there. I'm of the opinion that if I turn this off, every setting in here should reset to like 0 or nothing, because I can't go and edit my edges. So now if I want my outline to be off, I have to come and turn it on, edit my edges, and come back. So I personally think that's kind of a bug, but it's just something to kind of mention is to get it to completely square, you have to do both to actually turn off the edge entirely. And to put that back in, there we go. But yeah, that's with this one really it's diving a bit deeper into some of the unique ways that you can utilize the button to do a lot of different stuff rather than just having a button that just simply says bookmark 1 or something that you activate without much of an effect. So these are highly, highly configurable. And some of the best parts of it really comes from a lot of the alignment that you can do, the padding, which indicates how far from the edge it's going to be, the size. So there's so many different options in in buttons to configure, to customize it to whatever need that you might have. I'll again kind of pause here for a minute and see if there's any questions on this one.
What was the combination of the keys to get the emoji? Windows and what else did you say? Right?
Type into the chat too. Windows plus. There we go. Windows and semicolon.
Windows plus semicolon. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, somebody showed it to me at one point, and it's just like, that's amazing. I didn't know you could pull that up.
And that's a feature for just Power BI or any text button?
Nope, it's a Windows. It's a Windows 10 feature. You can be on a web page, like if you're in Word or anything else, that just pops it up. It's part of the OS.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, all right.
Looks great, Reed. I think a couple of years ago, I downloaded images to create, actionable toggle buttons, and I could have actually just done it with the buttons instead, huh?
Yeah, there are. I've definitely used images before when somebody wants a really unique looking one or something that looks like a light switch or other fun stuff. Then I use 2 versions of the image or something like that to do that. But this is a great alternative option without having to import an image file, which it adds a little bit of file size. And these will also render perfectly because they're being rendered as essentially an SVG directly inside of HTML5. So there's never going to be an issue of like fuzzy lines or jaggies, as I call them, with some image rendering, depending on the scale and resolution.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Alex was saying also Windows plus period also works, and I just tested it. So we have 2 combinations. Great.
I've never tried the period one. Does it? How many of these little buttons over there do that? Nope. Okay. Normally, like they don't have usually 2 keystrokes that do it. So that's actually curious that the period also does that. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this. Don't save. And where are we at? I'll do one more button related to that. Here we go. So as you can see on here, there's also some fun effects that you can add to buttons. Speaking of images, among the image types is GIFs. You can actually add GIFs to buttons. So I wanted to create like an effect that just kind of like was a sort of like, hey, click me thing to show up on a button. That's where the sheens came in. I wouldn't say I came up with the design ideas myself. I just Googled CSS, which is the script you use for like kind of cool visual tricks in web pages. I just looked up CSS button effects. And one of those was a couple of sheens that has that little like light strip. It's kind of like the equivalent of on a pair of sunglasses. You have the light source that passes by it, so it has that swing little effect there. And I created a background GIF that does that loops perfectly with all of these. I also have some at the top that if you hover over it, it has a little marquee scrolling thing at the bottom that I saw in another one. And then I tried to figure out if I could do it with like a wallpaper or something, just an endless kind of scrolling of little raindrops that are coming down. And for funsies, I threw the Millennium Falcon hyperdrive in there at the bottom. The one that I would most commonly use if I was to deploy this is probably one of these. These are fairly subtle, and it's just a very easy eye indicator to maybe tell people that this is something they can go click. And I did all this in PowerPoint, by the way, primarily because I wanted to give people a download file from the YouTube video that I did for this, so they could actually play around with it themselves, because I know a lot of people don't have Photoshop. But I'll show you just the setting in here, because like every other setting, there is an option to apply to 3 different states. Your default, hover, click, 3 different states that are in there. So as with this button in the upper left as an example, I will go down to here, and there you go. So there's an image for my default, and then a button for my on hover. And notice the transparency set to 50%. So light gray, press, transparency is set to 0, which gives the darker color. So I still get the 3 states. It's the same GIF being animated twice. It's just how light or dark it is. The actual button, or sorry, the GIF that I made is actually this color. The on hover state, I just have 50% transparency, so that essentially just adds in 50%, of that like white background in there, which still gives me the lighter effect. But the only part that you have to do is you come in, you select add image, and instead of a color in the background, it just simply funnels in whatever image you have via static or GIF. Let me open up the PowerPoint though, so I can show you that. Yeah, it's not that much went into these. Like the most basic one here, I have two objects. I have my background color, and I just simply have a bar that has a 4-second, I think, 2-second track animation, 4-second pause, 2-second track animation. So observed, if I just turn this on, that's just a bar that animates across, and a couple seconds, there we go, animates back. Because the important thing with any GIF is it has to loop. You don't ever want the end, the last frame and the first frame to have any kind of snap or reset. It needs to seem seamless between those. And the nice thing with PowerPoint is there's a really easy option just to go to export as video, and we have create an animated GIF. Choose our size and what slide you want. Now here's where the seconds to spend on each slide. So remember what I have is I have an animation, a 4-second pause, and then another animation. So each animation itself of the swipe back and forth takes 2 seconds. So that is a 4-second animation, or sorry, 4-second pause, 2 and 2. So now we have 8. And what I want to do is I also want a 4-second gap at the end, because it basically moves to one side, 4-second gap, moves back, and then I want another 4-second pause. So each time it moves back and forth, there's always an exact 4 seconds. So I basically take my 8-second total time for that slide, I add 4 more seconds to that. So if I do a 12-second slide, 12-second GIF for that slide, it will add a 4-second wait at the end before it starts the animation again. So that way it creates this perfect loop that goes with it. And that's what I did for all of them. Is you just have to make sure to get the timing and the animation to naturally reset, so it always has a smooth animation style with that. Basic one in here. A couple of others that I did for fun is, in this case, this is one that changes colors with the sheen. Again, inspired from a website where it swipes over a color and then 4 seconds of a pause, swipes the color back. Continued to look at websites. I found another one which kind of does a two-tone sheen. So it's 2 items that animate at a slightly different speed, but all of these are just basic settings that I have in here, and then I choose how fast does it go? Does it have any lead ups? And these are all little tweaks you can just do in PowerPoint. I'll mention the couple at the bottom. This one was actually pretty easy to do, because again, the goal is that you want to make sure that stop animation stops exactly, it doesn't matter how far it goes, you just have to make sure that it stops right on top of the line when it ends. So last frame matches first frame, and it can now just loop endlessly. Same thing that I did with the water drops. This one was a little trickier because the wallpaper wasn't perfect, but that's as close as I could get it to ending at the end point. I tried to find a pattern that was repeatable enough that I could do that, but so this one has a teeny bit of a little glitch at the end, and not quite as perfect as the others, but I basically ended the movement animation on the drops that were as close as I could get them to, without having to build my own custom wallpaper. I just downloaded that from an open resource for like rain wallpapers. For the most part too, they do not, they scale well. The nice thing that we have with this is all of these are set to image fit normal and or stretch. So it doesn't matter if I zoom in or not, because there's no items in that animation that is really detailed. There's no pictures of a face or anything else, so you can't really tell if it's been stretched out or heightened or shrunk. So the one exception is you can notice that the lines are angled a bit more, because this is a very stretched out image versus my versus the one in here. It's a bit more upright because it's taking a 16:9 slide and stretching it out into a much shorter box. But if you did not see the original animation, you would never know there was a stretch to begin with. So I went with patterns and effects that don't really matter if the button is this size or any of the others. It can be anything in between, and it can stretch the image without really causing any visual issues. But the majority of the work is basically just done in creating the GIF in PowerPoint, whatever you want for that, and then just adding it in the 3 different states in the fill setting. That was something they put in back in, I was going to say last year, but I think it's been about 2 years now. No, maybe it was last year. I think like April or May of 2020, they added the ability to add images into the fill. And I had all sorts of fun just figuring out cool ways to make buttons like this. But overall, are there any questions about adding the images to the buttons or creating them in PowerPoint.
That's pretty cool. Great, very nice tricks. Have you played with SVG or HTML? Kind of a for animation, not for animation, but actually for displaying graphics, inline graphics. Have you done anything like that?
You can import an SVG too. If you actually have an SVG file and you have
Right.
an editor that can build them, that usually starts to go into the more advanced. The benefit is that it scales, so it's always pixel perfect as far as the resolution for that goes. The only times that I've ever done that is I've had a couple of videos where on the matrix table you can render an SVG in a cell rather than a number or something else. Sure. You can actually embed SVG into the measure and have it render that. And I've created teeny tiny spark lines, which were previewed at MBAS. So eventually that won't be needed anymore. They're going to be spark lines as a built-in feature, which will be great. Yes. But that's the only times that I've done SVG was when I wanted to create like my own mini little spark line on the page and customize that.
Yeah, and the only problem is that they have to be square. Unfortunately,
yes, that's the problem. Is you normally want like a long spark line, which is short, not a square spark line. So you're limited sometimes when it comes to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any questions? Cool. One
more. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Let's keep on going.
I think I got one more that will allow us for a good wrap up time by 5. All right. So this one actually has a visual in front of us, a card essentially that, again, a customer request. One of my larger clients, for the most part, had a design team that built out the spec of how the report should look. And I would spend months building a really high-end model, complex model to service it. But one of the things that they had in one of their initial designs before we modified it was these cards at the bottom. They wanted a number, they wanted a health bar. Basically, the data isn't as important as much as we have a visual that gives a number. There's some type of comparison value at the top. This is just a concatenated text string of displayed information, but there's a comparison versus plan of if it's up, we want it green. If it is down, versus plan, we want it red. So just some KPI indicator that says good or bad. The visual itself started its journey. I actually had 3 different objects to create this. Here's the original. I can copy that. There you go, original visual. I'm going to open up my selection pane. There you go. What I had in here, if I ungroup this, I actually had 3 different things. I had a single value card at the bottom, and this was just a measure that concatenates, like I had a percentage, I included a symbol in there, a couple of other things. It's just a text string that I have. In the middle, I actually used a button as a little bar to basically be the color bar in there. And then the thing on top here just was another single value card. But the issue is that Power BI, the more visuals you have on the page, the slower the page renders. Doesn't matter how big your data model is, time and power is required to in a web browser to render per visual, because it's single threaded for web browsers, and that means that each unique visual on the page has to kind of load a library, and and that can start to add time. So I really wanted to avoid, because there was like five of these cards on the page. I really did not want to have 15 unique visuals for 5 cards. So I eventually figured out a way to, as a version 2 of this, to only require 2 visuals to make this. And that's the one that I'm going to show you how I built. But again, this gives the idea that buttons can not even have an action. They can not even be a button at all. They can just simply be used to serve as a visual. So this is in fact only, there's a button on the top, and we have down at the bottom a single value card. So same card in the bottom, that hasn't changed. But the top thing here is the button that I want to show as the configuration. So I've done a couple of things. The actual button that you would press, if this was to be a standard, like click me button, that's the bar at the bottom. Just to give you some context, press me. It normally would be like the button you click, but I don't have any text in there. I removed all text. I shrunk it down until it was, just one skinny little bar right there at the bottom. And the fill has an option where anytime you see this f of x symbol, that means that a measure that has some logic that is spitting out 8 hex code for colors or RGB, the logic is in the measure, and it just tells it what color it should be at any given time. So I have a measure right here. Just to give you an example, I declare a variable for the color green. That's just the color they wanted for that specific green, this specific red, and the logic. If this amount greater or equal to the 0, green, less than 0, red. So there's a measure that's basically handing this a hex code, depending on what color, or sorry, whatever slicers and fields you're filtering with at the time. So the color now dynamically changes rather than static. Now, the way I got this also to have something at the top, that is the title. The essentially what you think of as a card that's at the top for a single value, that is in fact just a title where I have put a measure instead of, more often than not, you just have like flat text typed into there. But about a year and a half or so ago, they added the ability to push a measure using, again, the conditional formatting button in here. I have an option to basically select a measure and put that into here. Now, it's important to note that the measure itself has to return text values. So notice, by the way, a few of these in here can't be selected. All these other variables that are somewhat grayed out, they are returning a data type that is not text. The only ones that I can specify in there have to actually be a text output in the measure itself. I'm going to go back, add it back in there, and I'm going to show you show you the measure just to give you an idea. There we go. So completed text. There we go. So I basically have a version of the measure that is just using the format function with a little bit of formatting in here. So what that does is it takes my value. Anytime you use format, just what it does is it actually converts it. It doesn't matter if it's date or numbers or currency, that will convert it to text and then format it to display it at whatever format code that you give it. So what I've done is I basically formatted that value into text. It looks like a number and smells like a number, but it's simply just standard text that's being outputted. So the one downside is that you have an extra measure in your model, but as far as performance goes, that there's no performance cost. There's basically no cost really to add one additional measure just in your model for the title of the card. And then the benefit is now your page renders faster because I've took what used to be a card and a button and I've converted it into simply one item that services both. So now I just have 2 visuals to give me my card, so to speak, rather than one. And when they're stacked together, there we go, and grouped, right click and group that, essentially now acts like a single object on the page to basically give them that custom card and look and layout that they wanted. But that's about it that I wanted to cover for this one. Are there any questions on kind of using the button, A, for color formatting for the bottom, for the bar, or B, how I got the data into the title as well?
No questions in the chat window. Looks like people are still kind of in holiday mood. But if you have anything else, that'll be great. If not, maybe we can wrap it up.
I have a couple of others, but I'll push a bit.
Oh, it's okay.
They're a little longer. Yeah, so I think this would be a good spot to wrap up. And I have a couple of other things that I can show up.
Sure.
Here we go. Let me do this for one quick sec. All right, and here we go. This is the slide that I wanted to show. Perfect. Yeah, so for people watching, the QR code on the left just takes you to my website. There's a couple of other links in here that I'll post into the Teams chat in just a second that takes you to the PDF that kind of had the outline of what I went through, as well as some links to some of the services and online courses that I provide. I actually just finished developing a course that's hosted on colleagues, another MVP's website called Skillwave, that walks through really all of the report features that are in Power BI. So it helps you to build out quality reports and gives you an understanding of tool tips and bookmarks, drill through, all of the report level features that really helps to show you the art of possible. So you're able to actually build quality reports for the clients based on whatever needs they have, because now you know what's available to then offer them as various features between and within report pages. As well, for anything that I have on my site, I always provide a discount code for people, kind of as a thank you for hanging out with me for an hour and a half and hearing some of the stuff that I wanted to show. I recommend if you like the stuff you saw today, it's very helpful to get people to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It promotes the views and YouTube to promote the video more, and it really it definitely helps the business grow. So always appreciate it when you can do that. And if you have any questions about Power BI in general, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer those and just help people out as they have questions related to Power BI.
Oh, thank you, Ray. That was great. Thank you so much for taking the time. And again, I'm sorry that we didn't kind of appreciate your effort. One question for you.
Sure.
Is it... Okay, that's you.
Yep.
Is there a way where they can download the Power BI desktop files that you use for your presentation?
Yeah, so in here,
Okay.
at the last slide on here will be a link to some of the supplemental videos on this, and on each of those, there also is then a link to my I have a blog files page that then basically contains all of the files of anything that I ever presented on, and that's where they can download all those stuff. So if they want to like look at that, any of the files that I showed today, that's all available on there.
Awesome. All right, guys. We will wrap this up unless there are some questions. Now it's, I guess, last chance to ask Ray for anything that he went through. Any questions from the audience? Okay, any questions, Power BI or Microsoft BI related questions that you might want to discuss or get some opinion on?
Thanks for attending, Rebecca.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Reed, it was awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
You know, we
Thanks for
spend
hanging
too
out
much
today.
time modeling and sourcing, and not enough time making some slick front ends. So
Presentation. By the way, I really want to, Ray did not mention this, but he has a great template app that he implemented, if I'm not wrong. I think this is by you, called Google Analytics. Actually, I don't think it's only one, but I think more than one. But the one that
I
I
have
used is
5 at the moment, yeah.
5 at the moment. There we go. You want to talk a little bit about that, right? You know, what kind of, what do they do? So I thought that was pretty
just
cool.
present that, and then I can present that and provide the link. Let me just share that quickly. Where are we at? This monitor, that one, and let me drop the
Google
link.
Analytics, that's the one that I'm familiar with.
Yeah. Yep. So it's something that's for people who have any Google Analytics data. Thankfully, with cloud-based sources that are plug and play, essentially, like you swap credentials and it can pump your data into here. I created one based off of the GA data that allows you to do analysis on like web traffic and everything else. I picked a golden goose in this regard because I think it's like the 4th most downloaded Power BI one in the App Store. The first 3 are Microsoft ones. It is the Office like statistics and analytics. One of them is like Azure. And there's one other, but there's the first 3 are just made by Microsoft, and then the 4th one in the list from talking to the PMs there is this one. So
it's yours.
It provides a nice healthy flow of traffic of people from around the world, usually asking for consulting or something off of this. But yeah, it's free basically. We're because they have to provide like tiers as part, because they don't want to put everything behind a paywall. But the free version gives you a 6-month historical record of your data, and then you can either choose to like pay $10 a month for a subscription to the online only version, or you can just buy the file outright for a few hundred. But it's like 7 pages of metrics and analytics that are in there. But it works for, I'd say, about 95, 97% of people that I see who download it. Every once in a while, because you have to configure Google to be able to harvest data out of your website, and there's like a generic kind of error message that it throws when there's not enough data to sample to aggregate it, and it just doesn't work. But the vast majority of the people, it will work with their data. But there's outliers every so often where it's incompatible without having to customize the model. But I have this one plus, there's a few others. I have like a KPI scorecard, budget versus forecast, performance analyzer, one for YouTube, one for Spotify. There's an Uber one in there somewhere too. But I have a bunch of them all in the app source that thankfully have all had pretty good reviews so far out of
very nice
coming in liking them.
And the visualizations are pretty good. I use them actually for demos because I don't like the sample reports that comes with Power BI. So actually this looks pretty kind of eye candy. in it. For customization, I haven't developed template apps, so actually I haven't tried that. But if they want to customize, let's say the data model behind the scenes, do you have the Power BI desktop files available, or they kind of consider it IP?
Oh yeah, that's something that they can get to them. I mean, like you can either subscribe to it and you can customize the report, but if you want, you can basically you can purchase the file. It just gives you the file. So you can do whatever you want. You can add a page, you can add other data sources. It's just a standard PBIT file.
Sure.
So it's a shell. You log in to Google and then you can customize it as you choose from there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for the great work you do. We'll keep in touch. We'll invite you again. I'm pretty sure about that. Hopefully you will be willing to present, but have a great day. And guys, thank you for attending this. I'm going to, in an hour or so, once the recording is ready, I'm gonna put it in the recordings YouTube channel. And I guess I'm gonna talk to you on August 7th, I believe it was, right? The next one, August 2nd, actually. Thank you.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Reed.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Teo.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you. It's great. This is great. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.